So why do nations trade with each other? I mean, it seems like a pretty basic question, right? But the answer, well, it unlocks the secrets of how global wealth is actually created. So today, let's dive in and really explore the fascinating ideas behind it all.
But let's kick things off with a real puzzle, a paradox. Just imagine for a second that one country is just better. It's more efficient at producing everything. We're talking cars, clothes, you name it. So why on earth would that superstar country ever need to trade with a less efficient one? This exact question stumped early economists, and it really sets the stage for a brilliant economic plot twist.
To try and solve this paradox, the first economists came up with a very intuitive, kind of common-sense answer. And this was really the first big step in getting our heads around the logic of international trade.
And that big idea came from Adam Smith. It's called absolute advantage. And honestly, it's super straightforward. If you can produce something more efficiently than I can, using less time, less money, fewer resources, then you have the absolute advantage in that product. Simple as that. The logic here just feels right, doesn't it? You focus on what you are the absolute best at, I'll focus on what I'm the absolute best at, and when we trade, we both end up with more stuff. It's a classic win-win situation. But that brings us back to our puzzle. What happens if one country is the best at, well, everything?
And this, right here, is where that simple common sense theory starts to break down, which leads us to that plot twist I mentioned. Let's look at a scenario where absolute advantage would suggest that no trade should ever happen. Okay, so here's our setup. Look at country A. To make 1 unit of product X, it costs them $10, and for product Y, $15. Now look at country B. It costs them $20 for X and a whopping $40 for Y. You see that, right? Country A has an absolute advantage in both products. Its costs are lower across the board. So according to Adam Smith's theory, there's just no reason to trade. Case closed?
Well, not so fast. This is where another brilliant economist, David Ricardo, steps in with a totally game-changing idea: comparative advantage. He basically said, hold on everybody, we're asking the wrong question. It's not about who's the absolute best, it's about who gives up the least.
And the key that unlocks this entire concept is something called opportunity cost. It's a simple idea, really. Every time you choose to do one thing, you are, by definition, choosing not to do something else. And that something else that you had to give up, well, that's your opportunity cost.
This one idea just reframes the entire debate. It's not about being the best in absolute terms. It's all about what you have to sacrifice to make something. That sacrifice, that opportunity cost, that's the real thing we need to be looking at.
Okay, so let's apply this to our little example. For country A, to make 1 unit of X, it has to give up the chance to make about 2/3 of a unit of Y. But look at country B. To make 1 unit of X, it only has to give up half a unit of Y. So boom, country B has the lower opportunity cost for making X. Now let's flip it. For country A to make 1 Y, it sacrifices 1.5 units of X. But for country B to make that same Y, it has to sacrifice 2 whole units of X. All of a sudden, when you look at it this way, country A is the more efficient producer of Y.
This right here is the big aha moment of comparative advantage. You can see it visually, side by side. Country B gives up less to make product X, and country A gives up less to make product Y. This difference, this is where the real magic of trade comes from. So the critical takeaway is this. Even though country A is technically cheaper at making everything, country B is relatively more efficient at making product X, and country A is relatively better at product Y. So country B should go all in on X, country A should go all in on Y, they trade with each other, and believe it or not, they both end up with more than they ever could have produced on their own. Okay, so comparative advantage is amazing. It tells us what countries should trade, but it doesn't really get into why these advantages even exist in the first place. For that, we've got to dig a little deeper and look at the actual resources each country is working with. And that brings us to the Heckscher-Ohlin theory. It sounds complicated, but the argument is pretty simple. It says a country's advantages come from what it has in abundance, its factor endowments. We're just talking about the basic building blocks of any economy: labor, capital, machinery and factories, and land. A country's unique mix of these things is what really shapes its economic strengths.
Now, like any good economic model, this one has to set some ground rules first, just so we can see the core logic clearly. So it imagines a simplified world with things like perfect competition and totally free trade. Think of it like a controlled experiment.
And here's the entire theory in a nutshell. A country that's just overflowing with cheap labor, well, it should probably export things that require a lot of labor, like textiles.
And a country that has tons of capital, it should export capital-heavy goods, like advanced electronics. It's really simple. You play to your strengths. You export what you're rich in.
So this all sounds really great in theory, but how does it actually make everyone wealthier? Well, there's this really powerful visual that economists use, and it brings this whole concept to life. It's basically visual proof of the gains from trade.
So those curves you see, AA prime and BB prime, they're called production possibility frontiers, or PPFs. Just think of them as the absolute limit of what a country can produce all by itself. Any point along that curve represents the maximum mix of goods X and Y they can possibly create with the resources they have.
Okay, now, if there's no trade at all, each country is basically stuck on its own curve at some balance point like EA or EB. And look, they're doing okay for themselves, but they are fundamentally limited by their own borders, by their own PPF.
But just watch what happens when they open up to free trade. By specializing in trading based on their comparative advantages, they can actually reach a new shared point, E star. And notice this, that point is outside their original production limits. This allows both countries to achieve a much higher level of overall well-being, what economists call social welfare, at point W star. This graph right here is the proof that trade lets nations consume way beyond what they could ever produce alone. It really is a win-win.
So we've walked through some really powerful theories, right? From the simple idea of absolute advantage to the mind-bending concept of comparative advantage, and then finally to the resource-based Heckscher-Ohlin model. And when you put them all together, they paint a very clear and very optimistic picture.
And that picture is that free trade, when it's based on these principles, really is a win-win for everyone involved, boosting prosperity around the globe. Which, of course, leads to the one crucial question we want to leave you with. If the theory is so clean and so elegant, why is trade one of the most complex and hotly debated issues in the real world? That's something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.